Hello everyone, and welcome to Wicked Encounters, where we explore just what goes bump in the night. I'm your host Allie, and it's every horror fan's favorite time of year, October. In celebration of the spookiest month, I've compiled a list of movies that I think are worth sharing with you guys, and I'm calling it the 31 Days of Wicked Horror. We're on the 15th day of October now, the halfway point of our favorite spooky month. But in case it's your first time checking in, I'll tell you how I've selected these movies that I believe are worthy enough for you to watch. First off, none of the movies are going to be older than 20 years, so we can add some newer videos to our must-watch list instead of continuing to repeat the same ones from 50 years ago. Freddy! Stop touching those kids, it's disgusting. Secondly, I'll be providing the synopsis and plot of the movies. For those who may not like surprises or just want to listen to know what the movies are about, there will be a slide letting you know when we're coming up on it, and I'll let you know where it's safe to click on to avoid spoilers. Also, while many of the movies are streamable, I'm not really going to provide the info on where you can watch them, because it varies based on where you live, and let's be honest, streaming services and reliability in keeping their good movies, they have a bad track record. Finally, I'm going to give you some reasons as to why the movie stands out, and why I think you'll like it. So, 15th on our list is The Orphanage. The Orphanage is a 2007 Spanish-language horror film directed by J.A. Boyana in his directorial full-length debut and produced by Guillermo del Toro. Ayy! That's a recognizable name. The film tells the story of Laura, a woman who returns to her childhood home, an old orphanage, with the intention of reopening it as a facility for disabled children. However, what begins as a hopeful endeavor soon turns into a nightmare as her adopted son, Simon, disappears, and Laura is confronted by eerie and supernatural occurrences that suggest the orphanage holds dark secrets. I'm going to go more in depth and go over the plot of the movie now, so if you'd like to skip, you'll know where to skip to in 3, 2, 1. The film opens with a brief prologue set in the 1970s, where a group of children are playing a game of tag in the garden of an orphanage. Laura, one of the children, is eventually adopted, leaving the orphanage behind. Decades later, Laura, now an adult, returns to the same orphanage with her husband Carlos and their 7-year-old adopted son, Simon. They plan to reopen the orphanage as a facility for children with special needs. From the beginning, it's clear that Simon has a vivid imagination, often engaging in conversations with invisible friends. Laura, while concerned, dismisses this as a normal phase for a child his age. However, Simon soon introduces a new friend named Tomas, whom he claims wears a sack mask over his head. Laura is disturbed by this, especially when Simon shows her a drawing of Tomas and talks about a mysterious game that involves finding hidden treasures. As Laura prepares for the grand opening of the orphanage, Simon becomes increasingly obsessed with Tomas and the idea that he is adopted, something that his parents have not yet told him. During a heated argument, Simon accuses Laura of hiding the truth about his adoption and his illness. Simon is HIV positive, a fact that adds a layer of urgency to finding him when he later goes missing. On the day of the orphanage's opening event, things take a tragic turn. During a gathering of prospective clients and guests, Simon disappears. In her frantic search for him, Laura encounters a child wearing a sack mask, Tomas, or someone pretending to be him, who locks her in a bathroom. When she's freed, she realizes that Simon is gone. Months pass, and Laura becomes consumed by grief and guilt. She refuses to leave the orphanage, convinced that the answers to Simon's disappearance lies within its walls. Strange occurrences begin to plague Laura. She hears noises, sees fleeting images of children, and experiences increasingly disturbing visions. In her desperation, Laura turns to a medium named Aurora, who performs a seance at the orphanage. During the seance, Aurora communicates with the spirits of the children who lived there once. The medium reveals that something terrible happened to these children, but Laura is left with more questions than answers. Determined to uncover the truth, Laura delves into the orphanage's history. She learns that Tomas was a deformed child who lived in the orphanage years ago. He was hidden away by his mother, the orphanage's caretaker, due to his appearance. The other children, unaware of Tomas's condition, played a cruel prank on him by hiding his sack mask, which led to his accidental death when he drowned trying to retrieve it. Tomas's mother, devastated by his death, poisoned the other children in revenge and buried their bodies in the orphanage. With this knowledge, Laura begins to believe that the spirit of Tomas and the other children are connected to Simon's disappearance. She discovers a hidden basement in the orphanage, sealed off for decades. Inside, she finds a small bed and toys, along with the bodies of the missing children. To her horror, she also finds Simon's lifeless body. It's revealed that Simon had been playing in the basement, pretending to be one of the children, and accidentally fell to his death. In the film's emotionally powerful climax, Laura, overcome with grief, decides to join Simon and the other children. She takes an overdose of sleeping pills, and in her dying moments sees the ghosts of the children. She cradles Simon in her arms and tells him a story, just as she used to when he was alive. The spirits of the children and Simon appear to be at peace, and Laura is reunited with them in death. The film ends with a scene showing the orphanage's memorial plaque, suggesting that Laura's love for the children and her son transcends death. Carlos, devastated by the loss of his wife and son, visits the orphanage, where he finds the medal that Laura used to wear, a sign that her spirit remains with the orphanage and the children she cared for. And with that, the film ends. Hello there, spooky fans! I'm so glad to see you! To those who stayed, I hope you enjoyed what you heard enough to give it a watch. And for those who skipped, if you haven't seen this movie yet, do so. It's fantastic. But I bet you're wondering why it made it onto the list. What makes The Orphanage stand out? Well, for starters, there's its emotional depth and tragedy. The Orphanage is more than just a horror film. It's a deeply emotional story about loss, grief, and the enduring bond between a mother and her child. The horror elements are intricately woven into the narrative, but the film's real strength lies in its exploration of the human condition. The characters' emotional journeys, particularly Laura's, gives the film a powerful and tragic resonance that elevates it beyond typical horror fare. Atmospheric horror. The film excels at creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. Director J.A. Boyana uses the orphanage's old, decaying setting to great effect, making the location itself a character in the story. The slow buildup of tension, the use of sound, and the careful pacing creates a sense of dread that permeates the entire film, making even mundane scenes feel ominous. Focus on psychological horror. The Orphanage leans more towards psychological horror than outright scares. The film's terror comes from the fear of the unknown and the haunting presence of unresolved trauma. The film leaves much to the audience's imagination, relying on suggestion and implication rather than explicit horror, which makes the experience more cerebral and intense. Complex narrative. The film's narrative is rich and multi-layered, blending supernatural elements with real-world fears. The mystery of what happened to the children, the tragic backstory of Tomas, and Laura's desperate quest to find Simon are all interwoven in a way that keeps the audience engaged and invested in the outcome. The film's ending is both heartbreaking and shocking, providing a poignant resolution to the story. Strong performances. Belén Rueda's performance as Laura is a standout. She brings a depth and nuance to the character that makes her relatable and sympathetic. Her portrayal of a mother driven to the brink of despair is both compelling and heart-wrenching. The supporting cast, including Roger Princep as Simon and Geraldine Chaplin as the medium, also deliver strong performances that add to the film's emotional impact. Themes of love and sacrifice. At its core, The Orphanage is a story about love and sacrifice. Laura's love for her son drives her to confront the darkest corners of the orphanage, and ultimately leads her to the film's exploration of maternal love, guilt, and redemption gives it a depth that resonates with audiences on an emotional level, making it more than just a horror film. Cultural and folkloric influence. The film draws on Spanish cultural and folkloric elements, particularly in its depiction of the orphanage as a haunted, liminal space where the past lingers. The use of childhood games, such as the 1, 2, 3 knock on the wall game, adds a layer of innocence corrupted by tragedy, which is a common theme in Spanish horror. Cinematic craftsmanship. The Orphanage is beautifully shot, with a visual style that enhances its themes and atmosphere. The use of natural light, shadows, and the decaying beauty of the orphanage creates a haunting visual palette that is both stunning and unsettling. The film's careful attention to detail in its set design, costumes, and sound further immerses the audience in its world. Subtlety and restraint. Unlike many modern horror films that rely on jump scares and graphic violence, The Orphanage uses subtlety and restraint to build its horror. The film takes its time to develop its story and characters, allowing the horror to emerge naturally from the narrative rather than forcing it. This approach makes the horror feel more organic, and therefore, more effective. The Orphanage stands out as a modern classic in the horror genre because of its emotional depth, atmospheric tension, and complex narrative. It's a film that uses horror to explore profound human experiences, making it not just a terrifying watch, but also a deeply moving one. And that's all I have on The Orphanage. But don't worry, I have 16 more movies I'll be sharing with you. What do you think they could be? How do you feel about The Orphanage being on the list? Would it make it onto yours? How'd you feel about the ending? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to discuss horror more in depth with you all, so feel free to join the Wicked Encounters Discord group. If you like what I do and want to support me, maybe consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the little bell icon so you know when I post. If you want to support me in other ways, maybe check out my Patreon. Speaking of, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my patrons, Nakala and Beefalump. You guys are the best around, and don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. Well, that's all I've got time for today. So remember, I'm Allie, this is Wicked Encounters, and I'll see you next time. Bye!